What happens when one of music's most beloved artists walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly conversation and instead finds himself in the middle of an ambush? Bruno Mars, known for his charm, his $1,000,000 smile, and his ability to win over any crowd, found himself in a situation on The View that nobody saw coming. This wasn't just an awkward moment or a slightly tense exchange. This was a full-blown confrontation that had the audience gasping, the co-hosts scrambling, and Bruno himself reaching a breaking point that shocked everyone in that studio. Before we get into exactly what was said and how this entire thing spiraled out of control, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. Now, let's get into this because what went down was absolutely wild. Bruno Mars arrived at the View Studios on what should have been a routine stop on his press tour. He was there to talk about his latest music, maybe share some stories from the road, and connect with the audience the way he always does. The energy in the room was buzzing with excitement. Fans in the audience were thrilled to see him. The co-hosts were all smiles as they welcomed him to the table. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly friendly, exactly what you'd expect from a Bruno Mars appearance. But from the moment he sat down, something felt different. Joy Behar had a look in her eyes that suggested this interview was going to go somewhere unexpected. The conversation started off light enough. Whoopi Goldberg kicked things off by complimenting Bruno on his recent performances and asking about his creative process. Bruno, ever the professional, answered with his usual charisma, talking about how he approaches his music, how he connects with his fans, and what inspires him to keep pushing boundaries. The audience was eating it up, laughing at his jokes, applauding his insights. It was textbook Bruno Mars, charming and genuine. But then Joy Behar jumped in, and the tone shifted immediately. Joy leaned forward, looked directly at Bruno, and said, "So Bruno, I have to ask you something that I think a lot of people are curious about. You've built this incredible career. You've won all these awards. You've got fans all over the world. But there's been some talk, some questions about authenticity, about cultural appropriation, about whether you're really giving credit where credit is due. What do you say to people who feel like you've built your success on the backs of black artists without really acknowledging that?" The studio went quiet. You could feel the shift in the room. The other co-hosts exchanged glances. The audience, which had been so lively just moments before, suddenly didn't know how to react. Bruno's smile faded slightly, but he kept his composure. He took a breath and responded, "You know, Joy, I think that's a really loaded question, and I think it's important to unpack it carefully. I've always been vocal about my influences. I grew up listening to the Motown sound, to James Brown, to Prince, to so many incredible artists who paved the way. I've never hidden that. In fact, I've always made it a point to celebrate those influences, to honor them in my music and in my performances. So when you ask if I'm giving credit, I have to push back on that because I've spent my entire career doing exactly that." Joy didn't back down. She pressed further, saying, "But Bruno, there's a difference between saying you're influenced by someone and actually making sure that the conversation around your music includes the context of where it comes from. A lot of people feel like you've been able to capitalize on a sound, on a style, that black artists created and struggled to get recognition for. While you've been able to walk into rooms and onto stages and collect awards without facing the same barriers, don't you think that's worth examining?" Bruno's jaw tightened. You could see him trying to stay calm, trying to navigate this carefully, but there was frustration building. He said, "Joy, I hear what you're saying, but I think you're painting a picture that isn't complete. Yes, I've been fortunate. Yes, I've had opportunities, but I've also worked incredibly hard. I didn't just wake up one day and get handed a career. I spent years grinding, writing songs for other people, getting rejected, fighting to get my music heard. And when it comes to the artists I admire, I've always spoken their names. I've always shown respect. So to sit here and have you suggest that I'm somehow stealing or not acknowledging, that's not fair. And honestly, it's frustrating." The tension in the room was palpable now. Sonny Hostin tried to step in, trying to mediate, saying, "I think what Joy is trying to get at, Bruno, is that there's a larger conversation happening in the industry about representation and access. And sometimes people want to hear artists engage with that conversation more directly." But before Bruno could respond to Sonny, Joy cut back in. "Not ready to let it go," Joy said. "Bruno, I'm not trying to attack you personally. I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. There are black artists who have been making the same kind of music you make for decades, and they don't get the same opportunities, the same radio play, the same recognition. And then someone like you comes along, and suddenly it's everywhere. It's celebrated. It's winning Grammys. Can you at least understand why that might bother people? Bruno leaned back in his chair, clearly trying to process everything, trying to decide how to respond. He said, "Of course I can understand it, Joy. I'm not blind to the inequalities in this industry. I'm not pretending that everything is perfect or that everyone gets a fair shot. But what I'm saying is that you're putting all of that on me as if I'm the problem, as if I'm the reason other artists aren't getting their due, and that's just not accurate. I didn't create the system. I didn't design the way the industry works. I'm just an artist trying to make music that people connect with. And if people connect with my music, if they want to listen to it and support it, that's not something I should have to apologize for." Joy shot back quickly. "Nobody's asking you to apologize for being successful, Bruno, but people are asking you to be more aware, to use your platform to amplify the voices that aren't being heard, to make sure that the conversation isn't just about you and your accolades, but about the roots of the music you're making." Her tone was sharp now, more confrontational, and you could see Bruno's patience starting to wear thin, his voice rising slightly. "Joy, I do use my platform. I collaborate with incredible artists. I shout out my influences every chance I get. I've brought people on stage with me. I've shared my platform in ways that maybe you're not aware of because you're sitting here, making assumptions instead of asking me what I've actually done. So, before you sit there and lecture me about what I should be doing, maybe take a moment to recognize what I am doing." The audience was completely silent now. The co-hosts looked uncomfortable. This had gone from a probing question to a full-on confrontation, and it was clear that neither Bruno nor Joy was willing to back down. Joy's expression hardened. She wasn't used to being challenged like this on her own show, and you could see her shifting gears, doubling down on her position. She said, "Bruno, I think you're getting defensive, and I understand that. Nobody likes to be questioned about their success. But the reality is that this conversation is happening whether you want to engage with it or not. There are think pieces being written. There are discussions happening on social media. There are people in the music community who are saying that artists like you benefit from a system that has historically marginalized the very people who created the genres you're profiting from. And if you can't sit here and have an honest conversation about that without getting upset, then maybe that says something." Bruno's eyes widened. He shook his head slowly, and you could see him trying to control his frustration. He said, getting upset, "Joy, you just accused me of profiting off of marginalized communities without giving back. You're questioning my integrity, my respect for the artists I admire, and my awareness of the industry I work in. So yeah, I'm going to push back on that because it's not true. And the fact that you're framing my response as me being defensive instead of me defending myself against unfair accusations, that's a problem. That's you controlling the narrative instead of actually listening to what I'm saying." Whoopi tried to jump in again, her voice calm but firm, saying, "Okay, let's take a breath here for a second. I think we're all trying to get to the same place, which is understanding how we navigate these complicated issues in the music industry. Bruno, I think what's happening here is that people want to see artists acknowledge the full picture, the history, the struggles that came before." But Joy interrupted Whoopi, clearly not finished with her point. Joy said, "Whoopi, I appreciate you trying to smooth this over, but I think Bruno needs to hear this. Bruno, you stand on stages all over the world, and you perform music that is rooted in funk, in soul, in rhythm and blues. Those are black art forms. They were created by black people in this country who faced oppression, who faced discrimination, who couldn't even perform in certain venues or get played on certain radio stations. And now, decades later, you're able to walk into any room, perform that same music, and be celebrated for it without facing any of those barriers. That's privilege. And if you can't acknowledge that, if you can't sit here and say, yes, I have benefited from a system that wasn't available to the people who created this music, then we have a problem." The other co-hosts looked visibly uncomfortable now. Sarah N. was looking down at her notes. Alyssa Farah Griffin was glancing between Joy and Bruno, clearly unsure of how to intervene. The audience was still silent, some people nodding along with Joy, others looking sympathetic toward Bruno. This had become less of an interview and more of a trial. With Joy acting as prosecutor, And Bruno, as the defendant, Bruno took a long pause. He looked directly at Joy, his expression serious, and said, "Joy, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. I am aware of my privilege. I am aware of the history of the music I make. I am aware that there are artists who came before me who didn't get the opportunities I've had. I've said this in interviews, I've said this in acceptance speeches, I've said this to anyone who's ever asked me. So for you to sit here and act like I'm oblivious, like I'm just some clueless guy who stumbled into success without thinking about where it came from, that's insulting. And what's even more insulting is that you're not actually interested in hearing my answer. You've already decided what you think about me, and now you're just trying to get me to say what you want me to say so you can feel like you've made your point." Joy's face flushed slightly. She fired back. "That's not what's happening here, Bruno. What's happening here is that I'm asking you tough questions that maybe other interviewers aren't asking you, and you don't like it. You're used to people fawning over you, telling you how great you are, how talented you are. But I'm asking you to think critically about your role in an industry that has a long history of taking from black culture without giving back. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you need to sit with that discomfort instead of lashing out at me." Bruno let out a frustrated laugh, shaking his head. He said, lashing out, "Joy, I'm responding to your accusations. That's not lashing out, that's defending myself. And you keep saying I need to acknowledge my privilege. I need to think critically. I need to sit with discomfort. I've done all of that. I continue to do all of that. But what you're doing right now isn't about making me think critically. This is about you wanting to prove a point on national television, and you're using me as your example. You're not interested in a conversation. You're interested in a gotcha moment. And I'm not going to give that to you." The tension was reaching a breaking point. Joy leaned forward, her voice rising, and said, "So what you're saying is that you think I'm out of line for asking you these questions. You think it's unfair for me to bring up the fact that there are black artists right now who are making incredible music and can't get a fraction of the attention you get. You think it's unfair for me to ask you what you're doing about that?" Bruno's voice rose to match hers. He said, "What I think is unfair is that you're acting like I'm responsible for every inequality in the music industry. What I think is unfair is that you're sitting here questioning my character, my intentions, and my respect for the artists I admire, without knowing anything about the conversations I have, the work I do behind the scenes, or the ways I try to lift up other artists. You don't know me, Joy. You don't know my story beyond what you've read in some article or seen in some headline. So for you to sit there and pass judgment on me like you have all the answers, that's what's unfair," Joy snapped back. "I know what I see. Bruno, I see an artist who has benefited enormously from a sound that black artists created, and when asked about it, gets defensive, instead of just saying yes, you're right, I've benefited, and here's what I'm doing to make sure that the people who paved the way for me are getting their flowers too. That's all people want to hear. But instead, you're sitting here arguing with me, getting worked up, acting like I'm attacking you when all I'm doing is asking you to be accountable." Bruno stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sudden movement shocked everyone. The audience gasped. The co-hosts froze. Joy's eyes widened, clearly not expecting this reaction. Bruno pointed at Joy, his voice loud and filled with frustration, and said, "Accountable. You want me to be accountable? I've been accountable my entire career. Joy, I've given credit, I've shown respect. I've used my platform to celebrate the artists who inspire me. But you're not interested in that. You're interested in tearing me down to make yourself look good. You're interested in creating drama for ratings. And I'm done with it. I'm done sitting here being talked to like I'm some villain when all I've ever tried to do is make music that brings people joy." Joy stood up as well, matching his energy. She said, "If you're done, then leave, Bruno. But don't act like you're the victim here. Don't walk out of here and tell people that I was unfair to you when all I did was ask you questions that needed to be asked. If you can't handle that, if you can't handle being challenged, then maybe you're not as aware as you think you are." The studio was in chaos now. Whoopi was trying to regain control, saying, Okay, let's everybody just take a breath. We're all getting heated here, and I think we need to step back." But neither Bruno nor Joy was listening. They were locked in, staring each other down, both refusing to yield. Bruno took a step back from the table, his hands raised in frustration. He looked around at the other co-hosts, then back at Joy, and said, "You know what, Joy? You want me to sit here and play your game? You want me to give you the sound you're looking for so you can clip it and share it and act like you got me to admit something. I'm not doing it, because what you're doing right now is dishonest. You're taking a complex issue, an issue that deserves real conversation and nuance, and you're turning it into a weapon to use against me, and I won't be a part of that. Joy crossed her arms, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she said, "Oh, so now I'm being dishonest. Now I'm the one who's in the wrong here. Bruno, all I did was ask you a question that a lot of people want answered. And instead of just answering it honestly, you've spent the last 10 minutes deflecting, getting defensive, and now accusing me of having some kind of agenda. If anyone's being dishonest here, it's you." Bruno's face turned red. He pointed at Joy again and said, "You didn't just ask me a question, Joy. You came at me with an accusation disguised as a question. You sat there and implied that I don't respect the artists who came before me, that I don't acknowledge my influences, that I'm somehow stealing from black culture without giving anything back. Those aren't questions, those are attacks. And then when I defend myself, when I try to explain my perspective, you tell me I'm being defensive. You've rigged this whole conversation so that no matter what I say, I lose. And I'm calling you out on it right here, right now, in front of everyone." Sunny Hostin finally found her voice and said, "Bruno, I think maybe what's happening here is that there's a miscommunication. Joy is trying to address a larger systemic issue. And maybe it's coming across as personal when it's really about the industry as a whole." But Bruno cut her off, his frustration boiling over. He said, "Sunny, with all due respect, there's no miscommunication here. Joy made this personal the moment she questioned my integrity. She made this personal when she suggested I'm not doing enough, that I'm not aware enough, that I'm not respectful enough. She didn't ask me about the industry as a whole. She asked me specifically what I'm doing, what I'm acknowledging, as if I'm the problem. So don't tell me this isn't personal, because it absolutely is." Joy stepped closer to the table, her voice loud and defiant. She said, "You want to know why it's personal, Bruno? Because you're sitting in front of me right now. Because you're the one with the platform, with the success, with the ability to actually make a difference. And when I ask you about it, instead of rising to the occasion, instead of saying, 'Yes, I hear you. Here's what I'm committed to doing,' you turn it into this big dramatic moment where you're the victim and I'm the villain. That's what's really happening here." Bruno laughed bitterly and said, "Make a difference. Joy, I've been making a difference. But you wouldn't know that because you didn't do your homework. You didn't bother to look into the scholarships I've funded for young musicians, the programs I've supported, the artists I've collaborated with, and helped get exposure. You didn't ask me about any of that because it doesn't fit your narrative. You wanted to come in here and make me the poster child for cultural appropriation, and when I didn't play along, you doubled down. That's not journalism, Joy. That's a hit job." The audience was reacting now, some people clapping in support of Bruno, others murmuring in agreement with Joy. The co-hosts were all talking over each other, trying to bring some order to the chaos. Alyssa Farah Griffin was saying, "I think we need to let everyone cool down here." Sarah Ann was nodding, saying, "Maybe we should take a commercial break." But Whoopi's voice cut through the noise, firm and commanding. Whoopi said, "All right, everyone stop. Just stop for a second. Bruno, Joy, both of you need to hear me right now. This conversation has gone completely off the rails, and we're not accomplishing anything except making everyone uncomfortable. Bruno, I hear your frustration. Joy, I hear what you're trying to get at. But this back and forth, this finger-pointing, it's not productive. We need to find a way to bring this back to a place where we can actually talk instead of yelling." Bruno ran his hand through his hair, clearly trying to compose himself. He said, "Whoopi, I came here today to talk about my music, to connect with the audience, to have a good time. I didn't come here to be ambushed. I didn't come here to have my character questioned. And I'm sorry if I got heated, but I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected. I've spent my entire life honoring the music I love, honoring the artists who paved the way. And to have someone sit across from me and suggest that I haven't, that I'm not doing enough, that hurts. That really hurts." Joy's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. She said, "Bruno, if I hurt you, I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry for asking the question. Because these are questions that need to be asked. Not just of you, but of every artist who's benefiting from genres and styles that have roots in communities that are still fighting for recognition. If that makes you uncomfortable, if that makes you angry, then maybe that's something you need to examine. Because this isn't about you personally. This is about a system that's been broken for a long time. Bruno shook his head and said, "But you did make it about me, personally. Joy, you looked me in the eye and questioned whether I'm giving credit, whether I'm aware, whether I'm doing enough. You put me on trial in front of millions of people, and now you're trying to walk it back by saying it's about the system. No, you made a choice to come at me the way you did, and I'm not letting you off the hook for that." Whoopi interjected again, her voice weary. She said, "Listen, we're almost out of time here, and I think it's clear that this conversation brought up a lot of emotions on both sides. Bruno, I respect your passion and your commitment to your craft. Joy, I respect that you're trying to address important issues, but I think we can all agree that this didn't go the way any of us expected. So maybe the best thing we can do right now is acknowledge that this is complicated, that there are no easy answers, and that we all have more work to do in understanding each other." Bruno looked at Whoopi, then at the audience, then back at Joy. He said quietly, his voice exhausted, "I just want people to know that I care. I care deeply about the music I make, about where it comes from, about the people who created it, and if I've fallen short in any way, if there's more I can do, I'm open to that conversation. But it has to be a real conversation, not an interrogation. It has to be based on respect, not assumptions." Joy nodded slowly and said, "I can agree with that, Bruno. And maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I could have framed things differently. But I hope you understand that my intention wasn't to tear you down. My intention was to push you to think bigger, to use your voice in ways that can create real change. Because you have that power, whether you realize it or not." Bruno exhaled deeply and said, "I hear you, Joy. I do. And I'll think about what you said. But I also need you to hear me. I'm not the enemy. I'm not someone who's trying to take without giving. I'm just an artist trying to do right by the music I love. And I hope that counts for something." The studio remained tense, but there was a sense that the worst of the storm had passed. Whoopi wrapped up the segment, thanking Bruno for coming on, despite the difficult conversation. The audience applauded, though it was unclear who they were applauding for, Bruno, Joy, or just the fact that it was over. As the cameras cut away, Bruno stood there for a moment, looking drained, looking like someone who had just been through a battle he never expected to fight. What we witnessed wasn't just a heated exchange between a musician and a talk show host. It was a collision of perspectives, a clash over accountability, respect, and the complicated legacy of music in America. Bruno Mars walked into that studio as one of the most beloved entertainers in the world and walked out having shown a side of himself that few people have ever seen. Raw, unfiltered, and unwilling to back down when he felt his integrity was being questioned. Whether you think Joy Behar was right to push him the way she did, or whether you think Bruno was justified in his reaction, one thing is certain. This moment will be talked about for a long time. So what do you think? Was Joy out of line? Or did Bruno overreact? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories we're covering. This is the kind of moment that makes you realize even the most polished, professional celebrities have their breaking point. And sometimes, that breaking point happens live on television for everyone to see.